Hey everybody, welcome to Off the Platform. I'm here today with Jackson as always. Hey Jackson, how you going?
How you doing, mate? Great. Yourself?
Excellent. Now we've got a very special guest on today. It's not our usual guest, but a very topical subject, and hence we wanted to get an expert on. So I want to welcome Nick Patterson from Drug Free Sport. G'day, Nick.
Kia ora. How are you both?
Good, thanks. Hey, thanks
Very
for coming
good,
on. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Now, for those, we did get one question: why is Drug Free Sport coming on the podcast? And I did answer it at the time, but let me answer it again. So, for those in the know, there's a very hot topic going around at the moment with the USAPL in the US, which is the IPF affiliate in the US. Very, very, very big association, 20,000 members. And they've been having a bit of a stoush with the IPF now for, I want to say 2 or 3 years. I think it's been going for a while around the topic of drug testing. Now, the mandate or the vision for the IPF is to get powerlifting into the Olympics, which we've mentioned a few times now, which is very admirable. And it's a step-by-step process for them to achieve that. Now, the International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, have said to the IPF that they must, in no uncertain words, clean up the sport a bit. All right, so there is inconsistencies around the way the drug testing is implemented across the various nations. And one thing they'd like to achieve, and I think, Nick, you might want to speak on what's going on with weightlifting, especially in the Olympics. And so the IPF have to be extremely strict about this. So they are insisting that all the member countries use WADA compliant drug testing, which is the World Anti-Doping Authority drug testing regime. Now, what the USAPL have come back with is that their drug testing, in their own words, is far more comprehensive, but they only use, and I don't know the proportion, but a percentage of their drug testing is WADA compliant, a percentage is not. Now, the percentage that isn't, they would insist is still very rigorous, which is, they're welcome to say that. The only issue that probably the IPF have and the IOC have is that the drug testing is, the collection part, I believe, is done by USAPL officials. So from an external point of view, that could represent a conflict of interest when you have judges, for example, going to athletes' homes and collecting samples. So
I'd just like to say, sorry, Greg, just in there as well.
Jump in.
I believe that the timings, etc., of out of competition testing and stuff is all organised by USAPL as well. So I think that also comes under the banner of what is WADA compliant, because then it's not third party, which obviously then links to the issue that weightlifting is going through at the moment, where the president obviously found out when tests and stuff were going to be conducted, etc. So then then shines the light on potentially for the USAPL. Okay, well, if their board knows when the testing is, who are they making privy to that information?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, actually, they have a very good point. The USAPL choose or select who they drug test,
and they also select who they drug test. Yeah, it's they select as well. So they, that is obviously not third party as such. Like you could easily.
No, exactly.
Open to corruption would be the word.
And I believe some of the criteria is looking at behaviour or just the way the athlete looks.
Yeah, it's crazy. His traps are too big.
Yeah,
can't test him.
So, yeah, exactly. So with that as context, let's move on to our guest. So Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself and about the Drug Free Sport organisation here in New Zealand.
Hey, look, thanks. So, as you say, I'm Nick Patterson. I'm the Chief Executive at Drug Free Sport New Zealand. We were created quite some time ago, and our job in life is really to support clean Kiwi athletes. We're here for clean sports, clean athletes, clean sport. We historically haven't had and do not have a significant doping issue in New Zealand. It's different in other countries, and you might have seen reports regarding Russia and a number of Olympic Games. You've highlighted the International Weightlifting Federation, etc. And so there are problems around the world, we know, but we know we don't really have a big problem here in New Zealand at all. In fact, there are certainly 1 or 2 people who make bad decisions. But what that means for us is that we're not really here to catch cheats. We will do that, of course, but we're really here to support the rest of the athletes to make sure that they understand the rules, they know what medications they can take in sport, they know what they can't take, they know what the risks are, and that might be supplements. There's significant risks around supplements. We might return to that topic. But also what you do if you're a diabetic, say insulin is banned in sport. Does that mean we can have no diabetics taking part in high performance sport? Well, the answer to that is no. Actually, we've got a TUE therapeutic use exemption facility, effectively a doctor's note, which means that if you are diabetic, you need to take insulin, you come before our expert doctors, they give you a doctor's note, and you can take insulin in sport. And it becomes okay. But that's the sort of education that we want to get across to athletes. We want them to play by the rules. We want them to do it properly. And our role is to support them in doing that.
Fantastic. So how big is the organisation, Nick? Is it obviously it's nationwide?
We've got 15 people based in Auckland, in Ellerslie, and then we've got a field team of roughly 120 up and down the country. So we're testing and educating throughout the country every day of every week throughout the year, actually. And so the guys boots on the ground doing the work. So if you've got athletes out there or athletes coming across our team, it's typically the field team.
Okay. And Jackson, if you jump in wherever you want. Now, Nick, just in terms of the sports that are involved, the organisations that are involved with drug-free sport, how numerous are they?
It's just about every sport, but I wonder if it might be useful just to go back to the origins of not of doping in sport, because let's be honest, that's been around for hundreds of years, I imagine. But actually sort of our role on the World Anti-Doping Agency, if you go back to 96, 97, 98, 99, we had some significant issues in the Tour de France around that time. Go back 10 years before that, and you had the 100-meter final in the 88 Olympics, sorry. And that sort of thing. So there's been issues around, and what we saw in the late 90s was that different sports were applying different rules. And the International Olympic Committee, combined with governments of the world, came together to form the World Anti-Doping Agency. And the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, then wrote the World Anti-Doping Code, which is effectively the rules by which we exist and by which we educate, by which we test, by which the science, the labs, test the samples. And it's the rules by which we all abide. Now, the aim of those rules were to harmonise approach to anti-doping across the world. It's no good having us holding Kiwi athletes to this level of integrity and standards, which is what we'll do naturally because it's part of our culture. But then you find a different nation holding their athletes to a lower level. That's no good for our athletes. It's no good for sports. We need everyone held to the same level, and that's what WADA was established to do. The rules that they set, they're not perfect. It can be quite blunt at times, but it does mean we have consistency across the nations and consistency across the sports. And this kind of becomes relevant to your USAPL piece as to how tests are carried out. I want to be able to say to our athletes, if you're a rower, or if you're a lifter, or if you're a rugby player, if you're tested in New Zealand, or if you're tested in Russia, or if you're tested in the UK, it's the same process. You should have the same expectation, and you should have the same process. And you should also have confidence that your competitors are also facing the same process. So that process, there's a real need for that to be consistent. And so that's just the important sort of premise for our being. If I come back to your original question, Greg, that's the premise for which we all exist, consistency across sports. We educate across all sports, just about in New Zealand. The list is very long as to the sports that we've educated. The list of sports that we test in is a bit smaller because we've got limited resources. And we tend to focus on the high performance end of the most risky sports. But education, in fact, we're educating them to schools now. Secondary level, intermediate and high school kids are getting our education as well.
Yeah. So in terms of that, Nick, that was going to be my next question. Actually, was what sort of sports in New Zealand? You say that, so obviously you guys are a national organisation. You get your education out to everyone. But so the actual testing list is much smaller, because I know in the States a lot of the things like baseball, NFL, etc., have their own testing regime, which obvious. And so in New Zealand, do we have any sports like that, or is pretty much all of those high-profile sports on your guys' list? Rugby, cricket, rowing.
Every one of them. If you named 30 sports, if you tried to list out 30, 40, 50 biggest, most important sports in New Zealand, I would say with confidence that we are educating all of them. We're probably testing in at least half of them, but certainly the top 10 or 15, we're testing in all of them. This year's a special year, of course. It's the quadrennial. We've got the Olympics and Paralympics coming up in Tokyo. And what that means is we actually spread our testing a wee bit wider. There are some sports which we will have people going to the Olympics, but they're not I'm going to say they're minority sports potentially, or smaller sports, and we wouldn't normally test in them, but an Olympic year we will do, because I don't want an athlete representing New Zealand going overseas, getting tested in Tokyo if they've never been tested before, because it's quite a confronting experience. It's quite personal.
Yeah, for sure. So is that so? In theory, then, so you mean you haven't tested them sort of out of competition or at like a national level here, and so then you want to test them to make sure that on the track they're basically clean on the way to qualifying?
Look, it's a bit of that, but we may not test them in years 1, 2, and 3, but in year 4 ahead of the Olympics, then we might suddenly start testing them, just to make sure that sport knows that the sport as a whole knows that they're subject to testing. The athletes know that they're subject to testing at any time, because testing is as much a deterrence as it is detection. If you know that we could turn up any day and knock on your door and test you, then I'm hoping you'll be more reluctant to take any risks. You're going to be less inclined to cheat, because we're going to turn up on the door. And if we test you and you've got something in you, you're facing 2 years, 4 years, or 8 years out of your sport.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense.
So is there any liaison with organizations in that respect? Like, or do you guys just have a list and you'll just say, I'm going to test that person? Or do they say, we think you should test this person?
We will rely on the National Sporting Organisation, the NSO, to help us understand the structure of their sport, the levels of competition in their sport, and their let's call them their high performance, their best people, people who are coming through the system, either currently performing very well, or also the ones who are potentially youngsters who we think will perform well in the future on the high performance track. So we rely on the NSOs really strongly for that sort of information. We don't talk to the NSOs about who we should test in terms of selection. That's entirely done within this office here. But and that will be based on information from the NSOs. It might be based on, depending on the sport, social media types. We might get some intel from social media. We might get intel from people reporting concerns on our speak out line, whistleblowing line, and to say, look, I've got a concern about this person. He's suddenly lifting a huge amount more, or she's suddenly got a change in physical attributes, which I'm concerned about. And don't get me wrong, we won't just go and test somebody because we've had a call saying this person is suddenly delivering big results. We analyze that and we'll look at that intel and say, can we rely on it? Is it someone just raising a concern? Have we had multiple reports about the same athlete? Do we have other bits of intel? We might have science, previous test results, which say there's an anomaly here, and then we might go and test them. So there's a whole range of factors going to testing, but NSO recommendation isn't one of them.
Right. Okay, interesting. That's cool. You go. Sorry, Rick, you had something to say.
Yeah, Nick, you touched on before around penalties. Now, that's not up to Drug Free Sport to dictate what penalties are, right? That's to the organisations themselves. So they set the bar in terms of what. So look, sorry to interrupt, Greg. That's different jurisdiction, country to country. It's done in different ways. I'm clearly subjective on this, but I genuinely believe our process in New Zealand is really strong and really good. And the potential sanctions are set down in the World Anti-Doping Code. So it's a blunt instrument, but it's a really good set of rules. And it says that if you are on a first offence, you're probably going to get 4 years. If you're on a second offence, you're probably going to get 8 years. And if you're caught a third time, that's a lifetime ban. Yeah.
Now, those 4 years as a first offence can get reduced to 2 years or below for various reasons, or could be increased if there's aggravating circumstances. But again, that's set in the code. Our job is to collect the evidence. We then present the evidence to an independent tribunal, the Sports Tribunal of New Zealand, which has got an independent chair, independent members who are typically experts in law, in sport, or in medicine. And they sit and hear the evidence like a court. It's a quasi court, effectively. It's a judicial body. They hear the evidence. They will ask us what we think. They will ask the athlete what the athlete thinks. There may be a hearing where we all appear before them and put the evidence forward, and the athlete defends it or explains it. And then they make a decision. And they make a decision as to guilt, or whether we've proven that an anti-doping rule violation, which is what it's called, has been proven. And then they make a decision as to the sanction, the ban. So it's all to do with them, but it is, the code sets this out so clearly what's available.
Yeah. Now there is some. I have heard tales of some sports or some athletes only receiving weeks in terms of penalties. I think that was mentioned on a recent podcast. Would that? I don't think that's in New Zealand per se. So
I'll tell you, it's not here. Not knowing what you're talking about, but it's not. I can tell you for sure, it's not in New Zealand. It should not be happening to any significant degree anywhere around the world.
Okay, I think it was the NFL. NFL was mentioned.
Oh yeah.
It was in the King of the List podcast. So shout out, we'll put that in the show notes as well. Very good episode. But NFL, that's not WADA compliance.
Sorry, I should have explained. You did mention that earlier. The US professional sports, American football, baseball, basketball, they are not signatories to the World Anti-Doping Code. They're not subject to WADA, and they've decided to do that. If you look at the origins, as I say, of WADA, it was around the Olympics. It was the IOC was a driving force in setting up the World Anti-Doping Agency. And so the original mandate for anti-doping organizations was Olympic sports. You had to have been in the Olympics to have been caught by this, and that's since very quickly extended to include the Paralympics. And since then, lots of other sports have signed up, right the way through to esports now. I think international esports has signed up to the WADA code. And we've had discussions here with the New Zealand Esports Federation.
For a brief second, I'm like, what would they? Okay, but I'm thinking stimulants.
Man. Any of that sort of stuff to keep you alert.
Yeah,
faster reaction times.
I'm not going to comment at all, frankly. But they're conversations we've had, and I'm sure we'll have them again in the future. So WADA was set around the Olympic sports. It's since expanded, and it gets more and more sports wanting to sign up. Australian rules, Aussie rules have signed up to the World Anti-Doping Code. But the American professional sports, they have not. They do run now voluntarily their own anti-doping programs typically. But again, look, I'm certainly no expert on American sports, but recollection from baseball particularly, they had a significant problem, maybe they still do, a few years back, where some of their biggest hitters who were smashing home runs consistently, turns out they were all on the roids.
Wow.
Yes,
I heard that.
One of the funniest stories I think I heard was about no naming names obviously, but was about one of their star players, and over the course of like 2 seasons, his helmet size went up 3 sizes. So I mean, if that's not sort of like, as a 30 or 40-year-old man, if that's not sort of tales of something going on.
I suspect that might be urban myth, but it might be right.
So is I believe so American sports. I also CrossFit. I bring this up every episode. I don't think CrossFit is WADA compliant.
I haven't checked. Certainly 6 or 12 months ago, it definitely wasn't. I don't know if anything's changed, but certainly recollection is it wasn't. It's not that it's not WADA compliant per se. It's just that they've not signed up to the World Anti-Doping Code. So they've chosen not to sign up, or put another way, they haven't chosen to sign up.
Yeah.
So it's not.
Are there competing codes? Nick, sorry to interrupt. Are there competing codes? Is WADA the only? Is WADA the agreed code worldwide, or is there alternatives?
No, World Anti-Doping Code and the World Anti-Doping Agency. It's the only regulator internationally.
Yeah.
That said, professional boxing hasn't signed up to the World Anti-Doping Code, but they test under WADA, which is the Voluntary Anti-Doping agency, I think. So they also do testing in professional boxing, but they do it because they choose to, not because they're required to. In professional boxing, amateur boxing is a Olympic sport, so it's signed up to the code.
Interesting. Okay.
Right.
Sorry, Jackson, you wanted to...
No, I was going to say some of these sports that say that they're drug tested. I mean, the Mr. Olympia is supposed to be drug tested, and World's Strongest Man is drug tested and stuff. Which
really?
Yeah. Well, in theory, they do their own drug testing. It's another one of those
Like
organizations.
like the UFC as well, right? UFC drug test. Yeah.
UFC is heavily tested. So
It is. Yeah.
our counterparts in the US, the US anti-doping agency USADA, they've got a specific UFC program.
Interesting.
They're not World Anti-Doping Code signatories, UFC, but they've run something really, really close to that, and they have extensive testing through that.
Yeah,
and we've seen UFC athletes banned across the last few years. I don't know, regularly, might be overstating it, but there's been a number of them.
Yeah.
The I think I can't. His name eludes me, but it was about 5 or 6 years ago. One of the guys, I think from WADA, went across and took over their drug testing, and
That might be right.
It's very, very in depth, because otherwise it's a physical sport. You could kill someone effectively, if you were that much stronger than someone else or faster.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so is there different lists of supplements or drugs, etc., for in competition and out of competition, Nick?
Yes, there is. Now that list of banned drugs or prohibited substances is quite an extensive list. And if you wanted to, there's a really easy way of checking whether you can take a substance or not, though. On our website, drugfreesport.org.nz, I'm sure you can add this to your show notes. On that website, we've got a check medications button, which takes you to a site called Global Dro. Now, you don't have to remember this, is all clear on the website. On Global Dro, anybody can go into it. It's designed for athletes, it's designed for pharma, it's designed for doctors. You can type in the name of your substance that you want to take, and it will tell you whether it's allowed in competition, prohibited in competition, allowed out of competition, prohibited out of competition. And so it's all just there, red for bad and green for good. Pretty simple to use.
So what is the? I mean, you might not know, but like, what is the point of having two lists in theory?
Look, there's a scientific answer to that, which I'm not going to pretend to try and give you, but it's a simple form. Some substances only last a certain length of time in the body and have an effect for a short period of time, and so they're the ones which may be prohibited only in comp, and they've got genuine therapeutic use the rest of the time, which is why you allow them out of comp. So you might use them to fix a medical problem for the 3 months that you're training, but what you're doing is you're fixing a problem. In terms of performance output, they may have a short-term 12-hour window, and so you're not allowed to take them 12 hours before the competition starts because you'd get a benefit from them. But out of comp, there's no long-lasting benefit from them.
But so in that respect, then, is if they allow you to train better, are they not then performance enhancing?
So that depends on the type of substance. The ones that allow you to train better, train harder, build muscle mass because you can train, they'll be prohibited in comp and out of comp. The ones which are fixing a sore knee or helping you recover from damage to your body in some respect, they might be the ones that are allowed out of comp. And because there's not another parallel medical solution, there's not another a different option to take.
Right.
Nick, would that include like stimulants, like pre-workouts? That obviously in competition banned, but out of competition still banned?
Hey, look, I don't know the definite answer to that, other than to say pre-workouts. So they're not. When I talk about substances, I'm talking about medical grade substances.
Okay.
Pre-workouts and supplements, they're not medical grade. They're produced on a factory line typically. And they're a real concern for us, a significant concern for us. And they're concerned for a number of reasons. One of which, the main one is, as the user of a supplement, you simply do not know what's going into that supplement.
No.
We've got cases in New Zealand in the last couple of years where a supplement has said on its ingredient list that this is what it's contained. And when the athlete's taken it and we've tested them, they've turned up a positive result for something different, something that was not on the ingredient list. And when they've tested the supplement, they've found that it did contain that prohibited substance. So we have some unethical supplement, and this is not all of them, don't get me wrong, there's some really good supplement providers out there, no doubt, but there are some unethical supplement producers, and particularly if you're importing from overseas from an unverified source, buying online, you really don't know what's going into it. As a supplement seller, we see adverts which say the supplement's going to grow muscle mass, allow you to train harder, any of those sorts of things. Now, if that's the case, there has to be a chance, and then you've got to estimate, is it low or high, that it contains a prohibited substance. Because the prohibited substances are the ones which help you grow your muscles. That's why they're banned. So your supplements are a concern generally. Pre-workouts typically are higher risk anyway, because they set you up. They're the ones which are consistently shown to be having prohibited substances.
Yeah.
Hey, one final bit. I'm sorry, I'll let you answer the question. There's a study just out of the Netherlands. They've tested a whole bunch of supplements available over the counter, I think, in the Netherlands, readily available. And recognizing Europe's bigger and it's going to have potentially a far greater availability of different items. 38%, I think was the number, contained prohibited substances that weren't shown on the ingredient list.
Wow.
Crazy. That's a big percentage. Yeah, that's mad.
Yeah.
So Nick, in that respect, a couple of follow-up questions to that is that in terms of the athletes who genuinely didn't know what was in the substance, does the decision err in their favour, or is it buyer beware, or athlete beware?
It's buyer beware, athlete beware, and I say that's the bluntness of the system. There's logic behind it, but it doesn't always feel. It's not always entirely athlete friendly. It's the athletes and the athletes alone who are liable for anything that is in their body, and it's up to the athlete to prove how it got there and why they shouldn't be found guilty. And that's really difficult. That's really hard if you're tested after an event and you get a result 10 days later, and we talk about it a month later. And then in some cases, it could be months. Then we're saying to you, you need to tell us how this got in your body. And by the way, unless you can prove anything, you're in any event, you're liable for what's in your body.
Yeah.
The reason behind that is when we talk to an innocent athlete who's got a positive result, they say to us, I knew nothing about it. I bought a supplement. It wasn't my fault. Someone spiked my drink, etc. And that may all be true. The problem is when we talk to a guilty athlete, he says exactly the same words. Exactly the same words. And so we have to find out, we have to work out which one's right and which one's wrong. And in the spirit of keeping our sport clean across the world, and we're all here for good, hard competition, but clean competition, the best person wins. And we've just said any athlete who's got a prohibited substance in their body is liable and they're facing a sanction. Now, the result of that is our consistent advice to athletes is know what you're putting in your body.
Yeah.
If you're taking medications, medical grade stuff, if you're taking medications from doctors, inform your doctor that you're an athlete subject to rules and you're liable to be tested. So therefore, they need to know that, and they go back onto our website, onto Global Grow, and they check the medication as they prescribe it to see if it's allowed. And if you're taking supplementation, then you're taking on risks. So be aware you're taking on risks. Again, on our website, we've got a supplement decision-making guide, which runs you through the 5 biggest risks and considerations that you need to be looking at.
Okay.
We can't tell you whether or not a supplement's safe because we don't know what's in it either. But we can tell you what questions you should be asking and what you should be considering. And if you choose to take it, you choose to take the risk on.
Yeah. So I think the key takeaway there, the key takeaway for anybody listening is know exactly what you are taking.
Yeah, correct.
If there's any doubt, don't take it.
Also look at the alternatives, and that's the if in doubt, don't take it. We've got a number of athletes who stick away from supplementation entirely, and they'll tell you getting good dietary advice goes a long way, and there's other ways of doing this. Now, I know there's 2 schools of thought, and I know across the years there's been a massive growing trend across all sports, at all ages, actually down into schools, about supplement use. So we recognise it's an issue, and we're not naive enough to say just don't do it. But that's why we've got the supplement decision-making guide to try and walk you through the risks, so at least you understand what you're doing.
My I always give credit to my wife. She is studying naturopathy at the moment, and I think she put a dash of peppermint, liquid peppermint, I think it was peppermint, into a coffee. And other than tasting horrible, I must admit I had tons of energy for the next hour. But yeah, horrible. So there are alternatives. There are alternatives, people.
Yep.
So in terms of that, Nick, so you have obviously, so someone comes in at what level? So someone comes in and say rugby or cricket or whatever. At what level do they then sign up to the WADA code? Is it high school? Is it juniors? What is it?
Great question.
My kids started playing soccer, as many kids do at age 5, age 6, for the local club down the road from home. At the point that their parents paid, at the point that I paid the fee to the club and accepted the club's terms and conditions, my daughter, who was 5 at the time, has signed up effectively to the World Anti-Doping Code.
Right.
Wow.
So in any of those sports, most like sports that are WADA compliant, it's as soon as you start playing that sport under that federation.
Once you sign up to the National Sports Organisation, once you sign up to their rules, which you do, so which in practical terms, once you sign up to a club, or if you enter a competition, you are signing up probably, almost certainly, to the NSO's rules, and the NSO has endorsed their international federation's rules, so you're compliant in that way. The NSO have also adopted our New Zealand sports anti-doping rules, so you're signed up that way too. You're signed up twice, actually.
Yeah, so basically, as soon as you sign up to that NSO, that National Sporting Organisation, you're effectively signed up to be compliant with the WADA code.
Correct.
So say in terms of say when your daughter reaches high school, and she plays football, if she goes and plays football in just a fun high school game that's not under a different organisation, or just not under any organisation, is she allowed to do that? Or is it, you know what I mean? Like, are you allowed that once you're in a WADA compliant NSO, are you allowed to go outside of that NSO or not in terms of WADA compliance?
That's a complex question. You can go and play sport any way you like. But when you've signed up to an NSO's terms and conditions, signed up to an NSO's rules, you're bound 365 days a year to those rules. So if you've signed up in soccer and you go and play rugby, with mates, you're still signed up to the code through soccer, and you're still required to keep to it. Now, I mean, I should say, by signing up to the rules, we can actually test at a theoretical level. And I say only at a theoretical level, we could go and test anybody who signed up to the NSO's rules.
Yes.
Typically, I must jump in and say we don't typically test recreational level athletes or social level athletes, and certainly kids at 5 and 6 years old. We certainly
of course.
The nature of our work is the vast majority of our tests go on high performance, international level or national level athletes, and that's where, of course, it sits. But if you're an international rugby player and you decide to go and play table tennis for your local club, we can still test you during a game of table tennis. Because you've signed up to rugby and you're a rugby player and you're bound by those rules.
So, but say in that sense, if they were a rugby player, so say, I don't know, like Kieran Reid, obviously, so All Black, etc., and he goes and decides to play a game of rugby with X, Y, and Z team that's not under the New Zealand Rugby Union, you could still go and test him?
Yep,
for sure.
Because he's still signed up to those rules.
All right. So it's basically, once you're signed up to the code is almost separate. There's no rules stopping you from going and doing whatever you want. You're just still signed up to the rules of WADA.
Yeah. So we had a case a couple of years ago about a fella who was, I can't remember the sport, but he effectively retired through injury in about the August-September time, the September-October time of one year. Didn't think he was coming back to sport, signed up with his NSO nonetheless, and ended up turning out one day for a run on side just to help out.
Yeah.
Now, despite his belief he was injured, and despite his belief, genuine or otherwise, that he was never going to play again, he was playing and he had signed up for the NSO, so he's still banned. And the fact that he had a prohibited substance in his body meant that he then got banned.
Interesting. That sucks. Like, that's just a misunderstanding of the rules, I assume.
It kind of does, but if you're playing, imagine you're playing a contact sport.
Yeah, for sure.
Imagine if that doesn't be a contact sport. Imagine you're lifting against somebody in a casual Friday night drink off, or in a significant competition or an international game. If you thought the other side were cheating in any way, you're going to be less likely to participate. You're going to find it less likely to recommend your sport to your friends. Don't play here because people cheat. I'm clean, but why would I bother? Why would I invest my time? You know how much time and effort we give into training. Why would you do it if your competitors are cheating?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, that's goes without saying. Like, if you're in a tested, I mean, this is a thing with powerlifting. There is tested powerlifting, and then there's untested powerlifting. And so it's one of those things where there is actually the option for people. And so then realistically, I have very little time for people that would use a prohibited substance and lift in the tested federations, obviously, because it's against the rules. There's an option there to go and do it elsewhere, you know. There's not many other sports in the world that have that option, I don't believe. No,
there's not. And look, I don't think there is either. The only comment I'd really make on any of that is that the idea of a sport having two approaches, one with drug testing and one not. I can understand some of the arguments, and we've heard them over the years across many sports. But competition aside, there are significant health implications of taking prohibited substances. You are rolling a dice, I'd say, if you're playing a sport which is untested and you're all taking risks with what you're taking. You're rolling a dice from a health perspective. So I've at a personal level, that would concern me significantly. At personal and professional level, I'd be going, spirit of sport. You know, we're here about. I'm going to be standing on my box lecturing people, but I'm a strong advocate for, as I say, play hard, play fair, go and smash the other person, but do it fairly, and the best person wins at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's interesting to say that, Nick. I think the history of doping in sport, I did hear or saw the other day, it goes back to ancient Greek times, with goat testicles or something. I don't know what they did. There is a fair amount of history with doping. Nick, I wanted to ask about the one of the comments the USAPL made in defence of their program was the cost. Now I know it is expensive to test, isn't it? And for them, they said it's prohibitive. Can you take us through? I mean, what if you can share the cost? I don't know what the cost is, and what's involved in why the cost is so high.
So bear in mind, in the first instance, well, every country approaches this slightly differently. Processes are the same, but costs and funding models are different. We are funded 90-odd% by the New Zealand government.
Okay.
Taxpayer funded. We're a government organisation. We're an independent crown entity, and so the vast majority of our work is the government supporting clean sport and knowing how important sport is to the country.
Okay, that's great.
So there's no cost to a sport. The cost of the sport if they want additional testing done. So when I say the funding that we're provided, we choose how we apply that, and we choose which sports we test in. We simply can't test in all sports, so we have to work out which sports have the highest risk or the highest benefit, perceived benefit by an athlete by taking a substance. No matter how many, there's nothing which you can take, which means you can do a spiral pass or kick a conversion from a sideline. Drugs don't help you do that. That's skill and talent. There are other aspects of those sports where drugs might help, but you don't get skill from drugs. So there's a whole bunch of sports where drugs don't have any effect. So we've got to identify which sports have the greatest effect from drugs, which ones have the greatest rewards, which might be financially from success, i.e. why would you cheat in order to win money, Why do you cheat in order to win medals or tournaments or competitions? Why do you cheat to get profile? So it needs to have a TV network following, it needs to have social media following. And so a whole bunch of factors. When we apply all those factors, we come out with 15 sports, which we say are our priority sports for all those reasons. And that's where we apply most of our testing. If you're not a priority sport, or if you're a sport which is hosting an international competition within New Zealand, it probably comes with requirements from the International Federation to test the winners and the second place and the third place, and maybe other people too. So the International Federation would say, you, New Zealand, can host our international competition on your shores, but you're going to need to carry out 30 tests. And the cost of those 30 tests are then borne by the National Sporting Organisation. We don't pay for those ones because we didn't choose to do them. It's a requirement on the NSA. And then look at the testing prices and how that works is quite complex because there's lots of elements. We have to send somebody out to run the testing process. We need to employ different people to go and witness the passing of a sample because it's all done face to face. And we have to courier all of our samples, get couriered to the Sydney lab. We don't have a viable lab in New Zealand, and that's due to quantity of samples. You need to be processing, I think it's 6,000 samples in a year. We're doing far fewer than that. So there's no lab which meets the minimum requirements in New Zealand. So for Oceania, it sits in Sydney. So we have to courier samples to the lab, and then we have to pay the lab fees. And all in all, that might come to between $600 and $1,000, say, depending on exactly how it looks. But that's kind of the quantum you're talking. If you are running a program across your sport, and this might be APL's argument, if they're running lots of tests across the whole of the US, and there's more than one lab in the US, they might be incurring significant costs. That's quite possible, and it kind of is what it is at that point.
Yeah, I think their argument was that they test more than the requirement, and they are very, very adamant that they want to maintain that level of testing. But for it to be 100% WADA compliant would be, I think, $2 to $3 million for them.
Wow.
Personally, to expect, but they do test it even at a grassroots level as well. Now, at what level does the testing give you is there a level of testing that gives you the confidence that the sport is clean? Or is it just a case of having the testing within the sport that gives some kudos, for example, to say we'll do our best to be drug-free?
Look, it's kind of the latter. The primary purpose of our testing regime is not detection, it's deterrence.
Yeah, okay. Deterrent,
We're sitting in New Zealand at less than 1% of all tests come back with a positive result. Internationally, it's been 1.4 and 1.8.
Okay.
Across the world. So it's tiny. But think about last time you got on a plane, and the risk of going on a tangent. Think about last time you went through an airport and you hit aviation security where they x-ray your bags and what have you. I don't know the answer to this question, but how often do you think AVSEC in an Auckland airport detect a bomb?
Yeah.
I reckon it's pretty small, if ever.
Well, I hope not.
That's correct. Well, I hope so, if there is one. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have AVSEC doing their job. They do a sterling job. And what their job is to give us comfort that flying a plane is safe, give us comfort that we're going to be okay, and deter anybody from taking on a bomb or a blade or a gun or anything else. So it's the deterrence is what they're there for. Because I honestly, I don't hear about them detecting stuff. I mean, no disregard to aviation security anyway. So that's where we're here. Our testing regime is to deter people. And we would much rather that people didn't even try prohibited substances. I'd much rather that than detecting, finding out, and catching people. Let's stop them before they take the stuff in the first place. So it's deterrent. So there's not a level of testing which says the sport is clean. It's more we do some testing in a sport to deter others, to take everybody. If you compete in the sport, there's always a chance. There's always a chance that you can be tested. And fancy 4 years out of sport. How do you fancy 4 years with a reputation of being a doper, not being able to go to your local club, hang out with your mates that you've been training with, any of that?
Yeah.
So on that, Nick, so with the band lengths, so there's a few studies in terms of specifically in terms of powerlifting, rugby, etc., where steroid use might be prevalent. There's no real consensus whether you have lasting effects from that or not, but a lot of the studies say that you do. You know, your muscle cells, you get very lasting effects. So you can stop and detrain and then come back and you'll still be better than you were had you never touched the stuff before. Do you think it should be, you know, because obviously at the moment, is 4 years long enough? Because
look, it's got to come down to some degree, substance by substance, and we get deeply into the science and medicine at this point. There'll be lots of substances which don't have long-lasting effect. They have a very short-term effect. Cocaine is prohibited in competition.
Of course.
It's not prohibited out of competition.
Right.
I'm certainly not encouraging anybody in that respect.
But they're down, Jackson.
Yep. Yeah, I'll note that down.
But I'm not aware that taking coke could have a significant long-term positive effect on your physiology. And so a 4-year ban for cocaine, or a 2-year ban, and actually it's just been reduced, but prior to January it was 4 years for taking cocaine, possibly seems harsh. But it's not about the effects of the substance, it's about the effects on sport. It's about the fact that you did it in the first place. Other substances, Jackson, I suspect there's some truth in what you're saying. Other substances might have a long-lasting effect. If you looked at some of the Tour de France riders, Pantani for one, and lots of others, actually, many others, they were able to train in a significant manner because of the substances we now know they were taking. And that builds muscle memory, muscle mass, and that potentially, certainly as we get older, we know that our muscles remember more and remain stronger longer. That might have a significant long-term effect. So 2 years and 4 years, is it enough? And those ones, look, I don't know. But I say the worldwide system is a wee bit blunt, but it's trying to raise everyone to the same standard. It's certainly not perfect.
So in terms of that,
can you?
sorry,
Jackson, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so obviously that's so them being able to train harder, longer, etc. So in terms of something like cocaine or an amphetamine as a stimulant, etc., would make anyone really be able to train harder, so you can increase the stimulus on your body, so you're going to get a long-term effect in theory. So should that not then also be banned out of competition?
Look, there's I can see the argument in there, but it certainly isn't at the moment.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, it's just
Yeah, look, WADA every year look through their prohibited substances list and update it and tweak it here and there, put new things on, take things off, change them between categories because of new science and emerging understanding or changes, or new substances actually. So this is kind of a constant conversation. It's actually this time of year, I'm thinking the date, May, it's June and early July is when the prohibited list gets reviewed actively each year before it's finalised in October and then takes effect from 1st of January the year after.
Oh, interesting. That's,
Now, Nick, I know we're coming up on the hour, but I've just got a couple of questions, and then Jackson, if you've got any closing questions as well. Nick, just quickly on the process itself. So for those who are unaware, in competition, now I can speak personally for this. When I was doing a powerlifting meet many years ago, I had literally just come off the bench, which was the final lift. So it was a bench only, and I was ushered into a back room. I was still wearing it was equipped lifting, so and I was asked to urinate into a test tube. Somebody had to observe that, and I literally observed that, so there was no shenanigans. That's still the process, isn't it? So it's still a testing in competition done almost immediately, I assume.
That's pretty much it. You get notified straight off the comp when you've finished doing what you need to do in terms of actually the sport side of stuff. You get notified pretty much immediately. You might have some paperwork to fill in. But that's all done in a room somewhere. I'm having not a small but dark back room, but you get fill in paperwork. You then got a chaperone who will look, there's details in there. You get to choose from 3 different sample collection pots, so you've got the choice, and so there's no shenanigans about them being tampered with.
Yeah.
You then nude up to the nipples and nude down to the knees, and with another person of the same gender standing in front of you and physically watching face to face. They watch the urine pass from your body into the collection pot. And that then we then have to process that, and there's more paperwork, but that's broadly it.
And who does the testing? Who are these individuals that are doing the actual sample collection?
So just for your listeners, we might need to be slightly careful with language, and I know I've done the same, so unhelpful, but our field team, our sample collection team, they're not testing. The testing occurs in the lab. The people in the field are just collecting the sample. And that's a field team. Some of our field team have been with us for 10, 15 years, and have been doing it for a very long time. They're extremely professional. They're extremely dedicated, actually, very personable. They tend to respect the athletes. We know that some athletes, when they come out of competition, are really chatty and want to talk about it. Some have had a bad experience. They haven't won when they hope they had won, or they're injured and they really don't want to talk about it, and will be annoyed for different reasons. So we've got to react to the person who we're testing, and treat them with respect, which they all do. But these are guys we've had in the field for a long time.
Yeah, no, I from memory, my experience was fine. It was a little bit, confronting, but hey, it is what it is. Now, Jackson, do you have any final questions? We're coming up to the hour.
I wanted to touch on something I sort of looked up recently. So at the Olympics, obviously this is different for New Zealand because I believe we don't have a doping problem in New Zealand, but it's interesting on an international scale. But the fact that, so obviously you've heard, I don't know if you've heard of Goldman's dilemma, where they gave they asked, I think it was 200 high-profile athletes, if I gave you a pill right now that would basically ensure that you won for the next 5 years, but then you would die, would you take it? And it was something ridiculous said yes. It was something like 85% said yes.
Significantly high.
Which just shows you the mind that these top athletes have. And then also I heard an interesting stat that at the Olympics, 75% of the positive tests now have been caught retroactively. So 4 years and 8 years later. So what, I mean, in terms of that, obviously you say it's more of a deterrent than anything, but the people are doing it anyway because they want to win. They want to live that 4 or 8 years as a champion.
Yeah, look, it's the psychology of this is really tough. I'll come back to the tanking question, but Tyler Hamilton, who was the American cyclist who cycled with Lance Armstrong, who coughed, and actually Tyler led to Lance's downfall. He won, I don't remember which color, he won a medal in the Olympics around that time, and he just said he knew he cheated to get there, and he immediately felt quite hollow having won. He'd gone through a big doping program for years, and it was just part of the culture. But he knew he hadn't won by being the best person at the time, and that affected the quality of how he felt afterwards about his win. And he's talked quite openly about this. It's really fascinating about that. So there's a line there somewhere between athletes saying, yes, I would do it hypothetically if given the chance in order to win, because winning is everything. I also suspect when it came down to the crunch, they might not. And even if they did, they may not feel quite as good about it as they think after the event. But the psychology there is it's just really tough for some of these sports, especially like all the amateur sports. Anyone who's not in a professional sport getting paid, and it's not easy there, it's just different. If you're an amateur sport and you're not getting paid to train and you're not quite good enough, that can be really tough. That can be soul destroying forever. Blood, sweat and tears and never quite being good enough. And yet it's your passion to do that. And so I can see where the temptation lies. But equally, we talk to people who succeed and then regret it afterwards. The tanking piece is an interesting one. Science is always ahead of us. So the bad guys and what they can produce and what they can think they can get away with, they're working really hard to beat us. So they come up with an idea. We then have to react to the idea after the event. And so there's always a window where they're ahead of us. There's always a window where they might take something. But it's for that reason, after the Olympic Games, samples are tanked for 10 years. And they're tested at any point in those 10 years. We, in our domestic program, we are tanking a little under 10% of all of our tests that we do. And they sit in Sydney on ice, probably literally. And we test them in future years as science changes, as the labs get better, as the equipment gets better, and there are people picked up. The number of positive tests out of the London Olympics after the event, positive tests has been enormous, and predominantly from a singular nation and in a number of specific sports. And it's not because London was a particularly dirty Olympics. It's just simply that the testing regimes got better.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I also, in my gathering of, I'm a bit of a nerd with this sort of stuff, Greg knows, but so most of the, I believe it was 85% of the positive tests came from 5 nations.
Yeah.
Which just is interest is so obviously New Zealand wasn't in that 5.
Yeah. So look, I know we're under pressure time-wise, but one of our big roles here at Drug Free Sport, we want to represent New Zealand athletes overseas. And when I say represent them, what I mean is I will go to international meetings and say to the Russians or whoever, your system isn't good enough. You need to up your game, because I want to look Kiwi athletes in the eye and tell them I'm doing the best I can do to make their competition internationally fair. So if the Kiwis are the best on the day, they will win, not get beaten by drugs. So that's the obligation on me and my team here, is to get overseas and say to everyone, you need to lift your game, you must do this better. And we've been actively, arguably aggressively doing that for 3 or 4 years. We're well respected for all the normal reasons we know and love in New Zealand, in terms of we speak ethically, we speak fairly, we speak strongly, and we're happy to call people out on bad behaviour.
100%.
That's awesome. Actually, I wasn't expecting you to say that we retrospectively test as well. I thought that was only at the Olympics, but that's so 10%. You reckon? A bit under.
It's approaching that.
Cool.
Great. All right, Nick. I just want to say thank you very much for coming on today. It's been excellent. It's been very educational.
Absolutely.
And for athletes and listeners wanting to find out more, drugfreesport.org.nz, we'll throw it in the show notes as well. Any final words from you, Nick, before we part ways?
No, look, always happy to talk. It's really good to engage on this sort of stuff. It is a topic which I find enormously stimulating, and I enjoy talking to others who are interested. So if anyone's got any questions after the event, always happy to deal with them via email as well.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Thanks for your time, Nick.
Thanks, guys. Stay well.
Thank you.